episode 413. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 413 of the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. In this episode, we are interviewing Sabine Lam with Google. And I really enjoyed this episode because we get to look at the art of possible. Whenever we talk with tech companies and we get to talk with people who are actually involved with the data and the integration side of the tech companies, we get to learn a lot. You will see a ton of stuff on LinkedIn about smart buildings, digital twins, all these kind of, I don't want to say pie in the sky ideas because they are being actually executed out in the field. The difference is you see them, and I'll be totally honest with you. In my experience, a lot of these digital technologies have been used to kind of wow the customer, but they're the first thing that tends to be value engineered out of a project. The nice thing about talking to folks like Sabine is that we learn how this stuff can actually be executed in a organization that has a really diverse set of controls and is really advanced on the technical acumen side of things. So with that being said, we're going to go to the interview, and I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll see you in just a bit. All right, folks. So like I said, we have a really amazing guest on here. Sabine, thank you so much for being here. Super awesome wealth of wisdom. And we are really going to be diving into, we're talking to someone from Google. This is pretty awesome, folks. Like when you think of big data, when you think of technology, they're one of the first companies that pop in your mind. So that's epically awesome to have you here. And let's just get right into the nitty gritty. One of the things you and I talked about in the pre-recording that you had a lot of really good insight to, and I really appreciated it, was around the use cases, because you all do so many different things and you have to support so many different users. What is your approach for business use case development?
You know, when you asked that question, I had to think of it as, well, first of all, Phil, thank you for having me.
Sure. Oh, of course.
And you did set the bar quite high. So now I'm a little stressed out around meeting those expectations of the amazingness of Google and potentially my input here. But anyway, regarding this question more specifically, I'm thinking of it as definitely multiple tiers. If you start with Google founding principles, is all about creating product that are users first. And I would say on the real estate side, we're very similar to that approach, where we think about our space for the users, right? So there's this concept of how do we create our buildings as a destination? How do we bring people back together? I'm not going to spend it in much time talking about hybrid and everything. There's been a lot of conversation around it, a lot of different approach from different company. We believe in people being together, and so how do we create that space that is so inviting that and allow them to be allow Googlers to be super productive, that they want to come back to the space. So it's about creating this kind of modern lifestyle experience. There's a lot of around toolings for hybrid space, but there's a lot all around the physical space itself. And then we really want to adjust to that concept of flexibility. So, there's the physical space of that you see, but then our ability to adjust the space in a very, very flexible way. If people are not coming, we shouldn't have the lights on. If people are coming, we should have all the amenities that they would want in the space. So how do we create that environment where we both help the Googler be super efficient, but also in a sustainable way, right? In a way that is good for the environment. So that's the first layer, Google vision in general. Second layer is what is RU's vision. So our real estate and workplace services team have visions for an improved future around, I started mentioning it, sustainability. How can we meet our 24/7 carbon-free energy operation goals? for by 2030. How can we make our buildings very efficient? This optimal building performance, reducing the cost of operation, and planning for future use cases. How can we make our Googler very productive within that environment, but in a very healthy, well-being, and safe way? That's definitely one of the big theme right now, and especially as everybody comes back from a year or two at home. How can people feel comfortable in that space, surrounded by other people? So the health, the well-being is a big aspect of it. Obviously, we want to retain talent, so the experience and the brand is a big element of it. How can we demonstrate the very innovative approach, and also a commitment to our community and our sustainability goal? And all of that has to be done in a very secure way. So the concept of cybersecurity is kind of the foundational part of delivering that space. So that's kind of like the real estate, workplace, and services vision, an organization of its own. And then you go down one more layer, the users themselves, right? And so now we approach it by having surveys directly with our businesses. And when I talk about businesses, as within Ruse, we have the facilities team, we have the real estate team, we have the global program team that does transportation, health and wellness, food, etc. The sustainability team is a team on its own. We have a security team, and then we have the end users. So all of those are what we call businesses and our main stakeholder. So what we do is actually we went around and had this survey of hundreds of users and asked them directly, what would you want to do with a digital building? Like, what do you need to do your work more efficiently? And we came up with, and we call that the business outcome, digital building business outcome, basically. And gathering all that input from those individual user, we start seeing trend of, what is kind of asked multiple times, and how can we prioritize those use cases to then align back up to Ruse goal, Google goals, right? And so now we're at the place where we have 16 or so prioritized use cases around, a utilization of the space, operation of the space, sustainability, etc. What do I need to make my buildings? My expectation is my building is flexible and I can adapt my HVAC system automatically to be reconfigured when the space is empty, or things like that, right? We get some very clear requests from those different end users. So actually feasible with what we currently have in the building, with data we already have in the building. Some of them need additional sensors deployed or additional infrastructure so we can access the information that would allow them to complete that use case, right? So now I'm kind of like level 3, right? Google, Ruse, users, and then the developers. Now we get to the level of what do we do about it? How do we prioritize it? And again, the priority is based on what does it cost to do it? How long does it take to do it? How far along are we in the process? So, what is the next step? What can we achieve this year? What can we achieve over 3 years? And so it's kind of an investment in time on, just a timeline on spending 80% of your resource on the now and then another 20% on the longer term. But having that vision of the longer term really helps us develop a platform that can enable those capabilities, right? So never locking ourselves into just one thing. Sure, we develop for the one thing, but we stay fairly flexible to enable those other things. So I would say that is our approach to, at least gathering those use cases and getting organized behind it.
Yeah, I've been taking a lot of notes. If you see me look down, I'm like, write faster. All right. So let's dive in, because there is a lot there. Initially, I think one of the things a lot of folks don't appreciate is the challenge of meeting aggressive sustainability goals while also satisfying tenants, while also operating facilities. How do you balance that? And keeping it cyber secure all at the same time.
Right. You go back to your guiding principle. We did say users first, right? And Google has very clear objective around sustainability. And of course, we're an IT, very focused on security type of team. So data privacy, legal, cybersecurity, all of that is also top of mind. So I think I would look at it potentially as those three major prong and kind of doing that balancing act of what can we accomplish within those three prong. A lot of, when we go through the process, we realize that there's a lot of neat things that need to be accomplished, and every single swim line has a veto power on its own. You can't do it if it's not cyber secure. It doesn't matter how amazing it is. We can't do it, right? If it's very difficult for our end users, doesn't matter how efficient you are. It's not meeting our end user goal. Veto, you can't do that. And so it's kind of process of elimination. There are certain things you can't do if it doesn't mean those very basic, not basic, but very strict guiding principle. Yeah. So, and I see our end users, the concept of focusing on our users it's the Googlers. For us, it's not a Google product, right? Being sold externally. Our user are the Googlers for us. Everything we're doing is for Google specifically. And so our users are both the Googlers and our stakeholder, as in the facilities team and the real estate deployment team and then global program team. We need to provide solution for them to be efficient in a way that's friendly to them. So
and plus you're a publicly traded company, so you have stakeholders outside of the business too, which that introduces something that is interesting as well. And I would say one of the things that I admire about you all that I've actually thought about implementing in our own business is your approach to giving people the opportunity to kind of come up with their own ideas. I mean, I've read a lot about you. That's how, a lot of the award-winning Google applications have been created, is people coming up with something and then bringing it. How do you, I've got to imagine you have people who look at the data that your team is able to produce and the use cases, and they're like, oh, I've got an idea. How do you balance that?
Oh, that's such a good question, because it reminded me that I forgot to highlight one very important point in those different layer of decision making. Is, we make a decision on which solution we're going to solve for with a global view, right? We kind of like, okay, this is baseline what Google should do globally for limiting carbon footprint. But then we also want to enable each region to decide how they want to operate the space. So it's exactly like where you're going with that is providing a solution that gives enough flexibility for an end user to do their own thing, to customize their own thing, to create their own application based on the same set of data, same set of information. But they may want to look at it in a different way for their very specific use case. And so there's definitely that, and the approach is to provide that platform that is secure enough, that has enough around protecting the information and accessing the information, so the end user has a little bit of freedom to customize for their space or their region. Internally, you're right. A lot of data is very exciting to anyone with machine learning background, right? And so we're giving them this kind of sandbox and playground to just go nuts with that information. And we're starting to see this, we're trying to focus on the basic functionality. And then we have people like, ooh, I can do this thing. Now you're giving me this whole like million data points of information. Let me see how I can apply machine learning to those things. And so, yeah, it's just, the opportunities are there. How do we balance it out? It's hard because it's tempting for the software team, for engineer or anyone with vision to just jump straight into the cool things.
Yeah.
Ahead of really implementing a very, very solid platform. And that, that's kind of what the rest of our, topics will be about. But data is one thing. Crappy data is not very helpful. And so it's not because you have a lot of it that you can do interesting things with it. And so, yeah, I would say for my team more specifically, I like to look at it as a 80%, let's make sure it's cyber secure. Let's make sure it's solid and we can rely on this information. And then 20%, let's evaluate, let's experiment with what we could do. And it helps us get a little more vision, but it also helps our stakeholder with the vision. Because when we ask all those questions around use cases, it's very much what they have in mind at the moment, so it's a very much like, oh, I need to do this thing a little bit better, more so than, wow, this is this incredible opportunity that I'm thinking about, and that's what it might look like. I think they can only get to that if we show them, example of what can be done, because it's such a different approach from their current implementation. I feel like operation technology in general has been kind of a little bit stagnant in the approach, and you're just struggling just keeping things up and running. So it's really hard to have vision for a completely automatically updatable, or maybe you can imagine it, but it seems so impossible that people don't even want to dream about it. Get that dream vision out of anyone who's kind of hands-on, head down, doing their job. And so that's the 20% in my mind where we're like experimenting a little bit. And then this experimentation also helps us decide to develop something, to productize one of those solutions. Then we have a better idea of what it would take, because we've gotten our hands dirty and we have a pretty good notion of how much engineering time it would take to go from this small use case or a small like prototype to a full-on solution for Google.
When I hear you talk, I think of the word that comes to mind is fragmented. You and I talked in the pre-call about the importance of data purity, of data taxonomies, of all of that. And in a nutshell, you would say, oh, well, it's just data consumption. Even though it's large amounts of data, it's still, it's on the scale of things. It's not like the amount of data that's going across a trading desk in the stock market. So the velocity isn't as much the problem, it's the semantics around it. I can only imagine all the different systems you have, especially having a global footprint, and then having to be compliant to data privacy laws in different regions of the world. All of that, and then you intermix trying to create a platform that is user-friendly, cyber-secure, and facilitates hitting energy-reducing sequences that can help you hit your sustainability goal. That is, I would say I can feel the overwhelm in that. But let's talk specific to data collection real quick, and then I'll circle back to a question I had about stakeholder desires. But you talked to me about what it was like in the beginning and what it's like now. What has that experience been, collecting that data from all these different systems across the globe? Because it is a global thing.
Yeah. So it's a global thing. It's a lot of different types of buildings. Some of them we move in, some of them we build. So that gives us flexibility in what gets installed or not. Some of them are operated by Google, some of them are not. So that kind of gives you a concept of how can we access the information. And then some data is very intrusive and some data is not. So the legal and data privacy team have different say depending on what you're trying to pull in. I think one of our approach to help with the concept of data privacy is definitely pull all that information within our firewall. So we have a very difficult time if our data needs to be sent to a third party vendor to do something with it. Anything that leaves our building becomes more scrutinized and becomes a risk. And so concept number one, how we keep that information within our firewall. The data should not leave the building. How do we go about it? And then who is going to be using how do we get the data from the building in a centralized location? The next question that you had was, you need to contextualize that information. It needs to mean something to someone. And so how do you model it and provide enough information around that? What is this device doing? What data points are important for my use case? What is the relationship between this device and other devices? Where is it located in our building? So this all the context for that information is in this is in the platform we're developing. And then we decide what is the permission for our end users? What can they see? Example, if you want information about count of users within your building, you may have to use sensors that are very intrusive because they know exactly where a person is within a space, on which chair potentially, if that's how narrow and granular you want to be. That becomes very invasive and kind of going against some of our policies internally. But if all this information stays within our building and is centralized in a platform that is trusted by our security team, and the only thing that comes out of this platform, like on our side, we only see a number, then now we have the ability to use that information and inform different use cases. But every single layer of it, accessing the data and making sure they won't get stolen on the way, on the way, and then organizing it, and then making sure that the authorization and access is very well controlled is how we go about it. But our building are also, like you say, very much snowflakes building. We move in, whatever is there is there. And so the technology we're putting in place has to be agnostic for sure. To what is there. And so, if you want me, I can jump into what the platform look like and how we go about it. And
in just a second, because this is an interesting one to me. I remember I worked at an OEM, and that's a equipment manufacturer. And there were conversations about putting tracking on trucks. And I remember some folks were really like, oh my gosh, you're going to track everywhere I go, how fast I go. And then I'm pretty pragmatic. And I was like, so what? It's the company's truck. At least you get a truck. And it's a delicate dance, because I can understand people being like, oh, now my manager knows where I'm at, exactly where I'm at, and they're tracking me. But then on the flip side, that data, especially at your scale, can dramatically affect how much indoor air you have to bring in, which that is air that has to be conditioned, which that reduces energy. That's a problem I don't envy you all having.
We work closely with very educated and knowledgeable legal and data privacy team that walk us through those concerns. We come in thinking it's not a big deal, and they kind of dissect the problem and highlight areas of concern. once we have that clear information, we can potentially build the right structure around it to take it to the next level. But it's a very slow process, and certainly very, very stringent approach to what we do in our building around cybersecurity, legal data privacy, et cetera, which, So you appreciate it after the fact. Yeah. Going through the process is very painful. Once you've gone through the process, you actually understand why it was so important to do it in the first place. And so every time I find myself, frustrated going through that process and not necessarily understanding why it's such a big problem. And then you get at the end of it, you're like, congratulations, Google. There's really, really good reasons for what we're doing here and why it's so complex. But we're at the point where we work closely with those teams. They understand our end goal. And so together we're kind of finding a way to make it happen. But we're not going to cut corners. And then that takes time.
Let me ask you this, and this is just selfish curiosity, and I'm sure it depends use case by use case, but which one's the most, and this is also, I'm asking you a lot of relative questions, but what is the most difficult typically? Is it the data modeling? Is it the data consumption? Is it the stakeholder negotiation? Is it the legal compliance? Like, what tends to hold things up the most?
I think they're all equally difficult. I mean, the end user has plenty of ideas for the use case, so it's not difficult per se. The difficulty is to prioritize it potentially and really understand the use case. They're not blockers. They're just kind of organizational thing. But, we think legal is the difficult part, but then I just realized that really the whole market segment is a problem. Like, we're not even getting the data in the first place. So I'm worrying about protecting the data. But the reality is, my meter is not even sending me proper set of information. So, what is the source of the information is a huge problem because it's not there. It's not accurate. It's not an industry that is used to relying on the data at such high rate, right? Yeah. Basically, you have your BMS system, pre-program your system. If the server goes down or your head end is down for a month, that's okay, right? Because basically all the controllers are pre-programmed and you'll just rely on this 8 to 5 schedule and just be okay with it. The building keeps running, even though you don't have access to the data. Well, you're missing a few alarms here and there, but people have lived with it. And so we're entering this environment where we are trying to protect so much information. And then as an IT company, we're used to having a lot of information and then realizing that the information in the first place is completely flawed. And so, we went through the entire process to create this very complex path and modeling and this and that. And then you realize, well, my meter is not even connected anyway, or the wire are kind of connected backward. And so it's sending negative data and I can't do anything with this. So I can't even tell you what's the most complex part, because to me now that becomes the most complex part. I have buildings that's sending me inaccurate set of information that I cannot do anything with, whether legal approves it or not. I still don't have a solution for you. So that's where my head is going. Originally, it was more legal data privacy. I think we're working with them and finding a path to work together and understanding what our limits are and working within those limits and building a structure around it. Now, my top of mind problem is everything I'm protecting here is worth nothing because it's not an industry that has cared for this concept of 99.9, the 3 nines. As far as you work with a network company, your network is up 99.9% of the time.
Yeah, SLAs.
I don't think it has not been the requirement on the operation side, because for many different reasons, right? But you've learned to live without that requirement. And so now that we rely on this data a lot more, we need to change that aspect.
That is very fascinating to me how our industry, the buildings industry, has a direct effect on the health and safety of individuals, has a direct effect on the environment. Yet there is, outside of some service contracts, there is not an SLA, so a service level agreement, for those listening who don't know what that means, for these systems. It's fascinating to me.
There's an SLA for responding to alarm or issues, but the problem is that there's the whomever installed the system, or I think the problem is there's so many stakeholders along the way.
True.
That enable this SLA, that the poor person at the end of the game that say, hey, you need to respond to this alarm in 5 minutes, but the network might be down, this might be down, this might be down. Like there's so many things along the way that can make this SLA really difficult to achieve. I don't know.
Well, and it's like what you told me in our pre-call was, you would find sensors that were out of calibration or, reverse polarity, so wired improperly. And on the screen, it looks great, but it's not accurate. And those are notoriously difficult to find.
Yeah, exactly. Or, it's buried in number of alarms that are coming through anyway. So, that's not the one thing you're going to focus on. You're going to fix your critical risks alarm before you're going to change the wiring on your meter, But now that sustainability is one of the higher use, kind of a more focused use case. And we need that information on an hourly basis. We're going from, I don't really, I kind of rely potentially on my PG&E bill to tell me my energy consumption to, I need hourly rate, of energy consumption from my meters. And now we are kind of zeroing and scrutinizing that specific component, within the building, or specific device within the building, and validating the accuracy of that device. And so the use case definitely kind of drive what system we're going to start scrutinizing a little more closely. And we're kind of discovering a lot of issues that were non-issue before, but becomes pretty important issues to solve for now.
Interesting. Now I know you asked a little earlier about showing the platform, so I assume you want me to show the one slide you sent me over. Let's.
If you think it's gonna,
I do think it's gonna be. Okay. Now, for those of you listening to this on the podcast and not watching this, go to the podcast link that I gave at the beginning of the show and go scroll down to the YouTube video and watch the YouTube video at whatever timestamp you're listening to right now, and you'll be able to see the visual. Alrighty, so here we go.
And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because I have had different podcasts and I've talked to, I think, Google in general has talked about this horizontal stack before, but I think it helps answer some of your questions of how do you get the data, how do you protect the data, right? And so, very quickly, if you look at kind of the center drawing, where everything we call it vertical, each system is individually represented, where you have a device talking to its own server, talking to its own application, user interface, and it's all connected together. And what I'm realizing here is maybe this vertical approach kind of helps the technician because they just have to, or even the operation team, they kind of zero in on one thing and it stays within its own environment. So maybe the debugging aspect of it is a little easier to what we're running into now. But the problem is there's no interoperability between those systems, and we cannot, achieve our use cases. We need things to talk to each other. We need the data from each of the systems in one place to have a holistic view of our building. I told you earlier we care about the cybersecurity aspect of it, but also access of it. And so the fact that this data is going to different vendors is not comfortable to us. So this concept of everything should be on a managed network, on the managed Google network, or if there's a head end, it should be on the managed Google server, as opposed to a vendor managed solution. And so there's this concept of we're bringing everything in. We understand there's a risk, but we're bringing everything in. And we want it to be centralized in one location. So on the right side, what I'm showing is our approach, which we call horizontal approach, where all devices are looked at similarly. It really doesn't matter to us what the device is doing at that layer. It's just what matters to us is that it is cyber secure. So we go through some level of qualification, and it knows how to communicate with our cloud. Instead of taking the information, from the device, goes into a server somewhere, and then we pull the information over, and like a bunch of API going in all direction, because every building is built differently. So instead of trying to pull the data from every building like head end, we get the raw information directly from the device. So that's what you see on the right side. And also what we decided is we can't just ignore it. So the concept of a OT network is not something Google is supporting. Our IT team wants visibility and manageability of everything within our building. It's a segmented network, but it is internal to Google. And so all those devices are on the Google network, and the data is then pushed into our cloud internal instance of a cloud data lake. In the process, we model it, we define the relationship between the different devices, and we have this time series data kind of sitting into this data layer. The next layer now is around the application and dashboarding and everything. This is the one that we can either build in-house, or we make it available to our vendor partner so they can develop their own application or their own dashboard. They can look at the data however they want, but whatever is developed at this top layer is applicable to our entire portfolio, because at that point it's completely technology agnostic, it's billing agnostic. It just takes information, analyzes it, and kind of displays it. If you notice, there's an arrow that goes up and there's an arrow that goes down. Depending on the use cases, we have to develop different aspects of this platform. When we talk about reporting for CFE 24/7, it's really more of just a reading, right? So we pull information, display it, and show compliance, hand it over. It's a kind of a compliance requirement. But there's definitely a lot of situations where we want to analyze and react and kind of override our controllers. And so there's a kind of a bidirectional arrow where we read the data, but we also write back into those controllers. So we have full control of the building and overwrite the way those different controllers have been programmed. So the point I wanted to make is that I talked to you earlier around the different use case and how we prioritize it. Knowing the long term helps us identify what this platform needs to be capable of, but we're developing the platform and increasing the features based on the complexity of the use cases.
So I got a bunch of questions based on this slide. The first would be, do you, and maybe this is something that initially you didn't do, maybe you do it now, maybe you don't. Do you have like a standardized process of going back to these equipment manufacturers and saying, build us your data model? Like, because you get it all into the data lake, but then you have to parse all that into a data model. And some of the data, maybe there's poor documentation. Maybe it's not clear what the data set is. Especially older systems are notorious for this, like not tagging their data with metadata. So do you say, okay, we are consuming this system, XYZ vendor. These are the data points we gathered. Can you identify them for us and put them into a model?
No.
Or how do you approach that?
Yeah, our approach is slightly different. We go to the vendor, definitely go to all vendor and saying, there's 100 tests we need to do. to make sure you can do, I don't know, IPv6, the different one of those very IT specific requirements. That's a direct connection with a vendor. Once they're qualified, those are devices that could be deployed in our new construction. For existing construction, we're kind of looking at it and see what are the risks and kind of evaluating how we approach it. But we're very aware of what is in our building and how we're going to approach the cybersecurity side, how we are approaching the cybersecurity side. We're also, if the device needs to be capable to talk to the cloud, not all of them are, but there's some level of gateway or some opportunity for the device to talk to cloud. We also go to the vendor saying, we have this MQTT format, your device needs to be capable of doing it in what we call UDMI, Universal Device Management Interface format.
Yeah.
So we're kind of providing those guidelines. As far as the model goes, so more of the data layer aspect of it, we work with master systems integrator. So basically in new construction, we have digital building consultant and we have master systems integrator. The digital building consultant kind of understand what use cases need to be supported for a specific building, right? I was telling you there's kind of a flexibility at the building level. So the digital building consultant kind of does their own analysis or interviews and understand what this building needs to accomplish. From that, they figure out what data points need to be pulled, right? Which device need to be installed, which data point are of interest. And then we have a master systems integrator who's trained on our digital building ontology. So at Google, we created our own ontology. We're not using Brick or Haystack, but similar, we have a tagging ontology. Created our own only because at the time when we started a few years back, with the existing ontology was not giving the relationship or giving kind of the serving the needs that we had. And so DBO, digital building ontology, is now open source, is what we're using to very clearly prescribe how you model a system. How do you define the type of your device? How do you define how it's connected to the other ones? How do you define which data points? How are those data point named? And so the master systems integrator comes in and help develop this model. We're also looking at automation for those models. And so we're working with vendors on automatically creating this model, because the problem very often, I think very clearly with a lot of existing solution, is if a person manually create this model, obviously it's going to be out of date 24 hours after you open the building, right? Things change all the time. And so your model is only as accurate, your time series data, your information that you have in this data lake is only as accurate as your model. And the model has to represent the building. And so if the building changes, which happens very regularly, right? You kind of change the device or you replace something, remove something. This model has to be almost dynamically updated. And so there's the concept of you start with a manual process, and as we go, we're automating this process much more and more. And then you have to be able to validate this model against your as-is building, right?
Yeah.
How do you know? Did you design something? Did you model something that actually doesn't exist in your building? How do we know that? Is your model including all the devices we have in the building, or is it including extra devices that are not in the building? How do you validate that? So in our case, for the modeling part of it, we don't go to the vendor. We actually have master systems integrator because it's still fairly manual. And we're developing tools around it to help with the validation and to help with the automation of that, creating those models.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So if I can take a guess, and if this is something you can't talk about, it's totally cool. But I would imagine it would be some form of like electronic O&M / as-built tied to a digital twin, and that then queries the building systems to ensure that your hierarchy is accurate. And if it is, great. If it's not, so for example, someone goes and does a tenant finish out or improvement, they adjust the digital model and then the digital model confirms with the actual deployment. And then I imagine it would flag some form of conflict if there was a conflict.
Yeah. So basically, you have slightly different tools for every single layer, because you're focusing on the data layer and the model, but before that, your device might not even be connected to the network, right? And so we also have tools on the bottom part of this stack to identify the health of the device. Is your device in your, are we tracking this device? Is it connected? So I would say, kind of at a high level, because everything is internal and is on our network, and the data is sent to PubSub or some cloud IoT kind of location, we have ability to kind of compare from layer to layer. The network should be able to discover what's in the building, right? I mean, you can discover devices that are connected to the network. That's and so that information can then be shared with the data layer model and say, hey, the network is seeing this. Are you modeling this? There's a little bit of a handoff between each of those layers. But I would say each of the layer has very different requirements and different tools to manage those requirements, right? Bottom of the layer is health of the device. Then the network is the health of the network. And then the data is quality of the time series data, and is the model properly representing my building, and then the application. So everything actually has a different tool. And I think that's where the complexity is. And I was telling you, I feel like we're breaking the problem. The vertical, they were all connected. Like the device was connected to the BMS. All that was so connected. It was easier to potentially keep it accurate. I don't know. Like if the BMS technician was coming in to change something, he would probably update the BMS, the whatever web controller, or the head end with proper information. Well, now it's not the case. We disconnected those things. And so we're just looking at an independent layer of devices, an independent layer of data, and you kind of need to figure out how to kind of link them all together and find the errors. And then once you find a problem, identifying the problem, and then eventually sending the right person to fix it, or automatically fixing it.
Yeah, that was always the challenge back when, in a previous life, did a lot of MSI projects, was what would be called day two. So, day one is occupancy, day two is operations, and it's, maintaining APIs, maintaining system. It's good that you all are thinking about that, because that's where the stuff falls apart.
Yeah. And so we're not in the business of maintaining API, which is why we just want the data from the device directly. And there's a lot of, we don't care what, each layer cares about something specific and doesn't care about other things. And so it's easier to control it this way.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on a lot of these product manufacturers pushing for cloud hosting a lot of their systems now? I mean, I hear from a lot of product manufacturers that, they have their analytics stuff in the cloud. They have an on-prem solution as well, but they're also looking at a lot of their protocol gateways, potentially pushing those into the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't 100% go cloud and no on-prem. There's, different functions sits in different places. So you have on-prem, the edge devices, and the cloud, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. I think all three are necessary.
Yeah.
I mean, your light switch has to be right there. It's not going to go to the cloud.
Exactly.
But edge compute is super important to compile the information before it even leaves the space and goes into your cloud, right? So the edge compute is super important for many different reasons. And then the centralized platform within cloud, I think cloud has a lot of capability around analytics, machine learning, AI, et cetera, that you can take advantage of in the cloud. And so I think each platform has its benefits. And I think it's not a bad move. But there's I have nothing to say for what other vendors do. For in our case, there's a lot of information we keep in the cloud for good reasons.
I just wanted to get your perspective on it because I know it's something that is being openly debated among building owner operators and these product manufacturers, and there's different schools of thought.
There's a transition. The IT world, I think a lot of the IT related work, or the document you use every day around whether it's Google Doc or Microsoft or everything, right? It used to be very centralized and then went into the cloud. Well, similarly, I think as the industry mature, they'll find the value of having this big chunk of information in one place and using capability of the cloud. It's just kind of a maturity. I think it matures toward what technology can offer. And so certainly I would evaluate it, depending on what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think the benefit you all have is just IT and technology being so intertwined with your just culture and ethos that it makes it easier for you all to approach that kind of system than a traditional real estate operator or, a school district, something where their mission is not, does not have technology intertwined with it necessarily.
Right.
Which is an interesting problem to face.
Transition. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's switch gears real quick onto data collection. And you talked a lot about it, but I want to specifically dive into the data validation. We've talked around it a little bit, but let's just talk about how you all, on such a massive scale, look at data validation and how you approach it.
So I thought to approach this question, I would speak more specifically of a simple use case. I kind of walk you through all the areas where problem might occur. And so if you would mind pulling up the slide that shows this end-to-end data path. Here we go. Yeah. And so just to ground everybody, basically, on the left side is your source meter. It could be anything. It's going to be the device that capture the data within the building. So depending on the use case, you may add HVAC system, you may add lighting or other things. But let's start very simple. A source meter. As I mentioned, we want that meter to send the data to our cloud directly. And so we have that concept of gateway. A gateway can be a separate device, that translate BACnet into our MQTT UDMI format. Or it could be that actually those two are combined. There are actually smart meters that are capable of sending the data directly to cloud. Or potentially it could be a software, find a sort of gateway. But let's stick to, it's an independent thing that is capable of translating OT kind of protocol into an IT protocol, MQTT in the UDMI format. That is connected to our network. In our case, it's a Google network. And then the information sits into our cloud IoT core. So it kind of takes that information into our data layer. From the data layer, you have the dashboard where you can visualize the data and you can serve those, you can, hand it off to your different metering initiative. So in this one, it's kind of a one kind of read-only path. So you have what we call a solution, is this end-to-end from the meter all the way to the end user, and then you have the platform in the middle. If you start on the left, right, the very first thing you need to know is the device existent? Is the device there? Is it tracked in an asset management platform? And you can just right off the bat have some level of troubleshooting around, the network is going to do some device discovery and is going to say what it sees. So first area for validation is my device even there? And if it's there, am I tracking it in some level of asset management system? And then we go to the network. Well, is the device connected to that network? Still another question that needs to be validated, right? Connected to the network, as the device connected to cloud IoT within a given time frame, like there's certain, we can start seeing the health, like the heartbeat state. We can start discovering some level of telemetry data. We can start gathering some information at that level. For example, we have a tool that is being developed, which we call the health device platform. We've been developing it with Buildings IoT, and it's open source. But basically, it's an interface that shows all the devices that you have in your building. It shows whether it's healthy, like is it up, is it down, is it kind of define the status for that device. It also, we're at the point where we can look at the heartbeat of the device. Is it sending way too much things or not enough things? Is it healthy at that level? You can end up seeing it in what it's costing you to send the data to cloud, or you can validate it with different tools. So, we were at the concept of, is it connected and transmitting properly the information? At this point, it's still not specific to, is the data accurate, as in, is my meter reporting proper temperature? At this point, it's all around connectivity. The whole left side of this drawing here. And then we go into the data layer model aspect. And the question is my device modeled properly? Is it assigned with the ontology type and translation that I'm expecting from it, right? Is it tagged properly, like we talked about earlier? And then the concept is it even complete? It's a number of values in the device payload, both successfully translated and within a reasonable range. And I can spend a little more time on how do you identify the accuracy of the information? Because this is, I'm only talking about the data path here, right? So I have all those kind of potential opportunity for failure to validate along the way. I think when we look at our data path, we were saying there's 8 points of failures. The information that we're trying to present our end user has 8 different opportunities to fail along the way. And anyone who's not looking at that then can't guarantee to the end user that they're providing good information, something to use, right? And I would say I wanted to spend some time discussing it with you in this podcast because I feel it's something I'm not really hearing when I go to conferences. I hear about digital twin, I hear about the application, and we have a lot of beautiful a screenshot of what a beautiful dashboard looks like. But I can tell you from my experience, we have dashboard, they look pretty, but then my end user say, I can't do anything with this. Like this information tells me nothing. It's completely inaccurate. Yeah. And the numbers are huge for us. We have over 200 buildings in this data platform, and so we have something. It's solid. We're beyond proving the concept. We've built the platform we want for our portfolio. We have over 200 buildings reporting data within that platform, HVAC data, meter data, a few others. Basically, out of all those, I think 75,000 devices are reporting every 5 minutes. That's 13 million records per day. We have no shortage of information, and you think you could do like fault detection, you can do adaptive control, you can do so much with it. But just looking at the meter data, the simplest use case possible, we can't satisfy our end user. So we have like 13 million records per day, ultralized and everything. And the reality is I can't even trust my meter data. And I feel like, that is a story that's not very well told. And also not enough conversation between users to ensure that the tools that are developed can highlight those potential issues from layer to layer, right? Like at the data layer, I can figure out, oh, but my meter is not reporting the right thing, but every single layer can report a different set of information, which need to be solved by a different set of stakeholder, right? If the network is down, I need to talk to my network team. If the device is connected, if the wires are reversed, I need to talk to the technician. If the data is not, if the model is inaccurate, I need to talk to my master systems integrator. Like there's so many people we need to talk to. That's the part that's a little overwhelming for me, because I feel like we can identify those problems once we focus, once we realize there's a problem and we're at that point and we know where the problem occur, we can develop the solution to highlight those problems. But then how do we convey that information to the right person so they fix it? So we're lucky. Google, we have, we have vendor partners that we work with, and so it's fairly centralized. But where you're an independent user here and there, and you're a third-party vendor, like it's really hard. Who do you send the information to is really hard. I think, Google is in a very privileged place for many ways, for many reasons in general. But for this one, is we're working so closely with our operation team and our vendor partners, and we're working very closely with our network team, and we have a corp IoT operation team, and we have so much support that we're putting it together. But yeah, I think that's a big problem that needs to be discussed. And I don't think it's been. I haven't heard it on in general. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, please continue.
No, I was going to say, like, this is kind of very specific to the pipeline, and then there's the concept of. So there's the quality is it even going through the pipeline, and then there's the concept of accuracy of that time series data, and so the accuracy we have three terms that we are kind of lining up behind. First, is it coherent? As in, there's no corruption or loss, right? No big gaps. So from the end to end, from source to end application, is it coherent? That's independent of the data itself, but it's really relevant to some encrypted payload. The second one is it reasonable? So the data that's reported is a reasonable version of the data, which means if I'm expecting a temperature, I imagine it should be within the 20 degrees Celsius or 70 something Fahrenheit, right? You're expecting a range. So if the data shows 1200 Celsius or 100 Fahrenheit, obviously that's not within range. And so the kind of having an understanding of what might be reasonable. What's reasonable could rely on someone who's familiar with the system and can tell you what that range should be. Or I think you have the ability to apply machine learning and find anomalies, right? There's like things, there are types of device that will show a sense of normalcy. And the one that comes out of that likely has a problem. So this could be done through, some level of analysis. And then the last one is whether it's accurate or not. And so the data is truly representing the information. And you mentioned it earlier, like if your device is not calibrated properly, it's within range, but it's not accurate. So that's a really hard one, I think, also to validate. And usually it's because you're validating against something else. And so kind of having, in our situation, we're doing a lot of work around functional testing. We're putting multiple devices, like, so in a lab or in very controlled space, we put multiple devices with similar capability next to each other. We run the same test on all of them, and we see which one is actually really accurately representing the information we're trying to get. And you'd be surprised what we find. Marketing and sales is really good, the device can do a whole bunch of things. Like like the world is, there's a world of opportunity, and then you test it out against very specific use cases and environment and requirement. I want this data to be accurate every 10 minutes, not every hour, not every year, and so this functional testing for us is really helping with the concept of accuracy, because now we know exactly how the device should be configured, how it should be installed, et cetera, to provide that accurate information. And that we can compile that information and start sharing, or at least if we find a problem, we can go back to, hey, we noticed that this would work right if you did all those things. Did you do all those things? As opposed to debugging, for every different building, we kind of have a little more of a database of information.
Yeah, I find it fascinating how just a minor shift of install location or wiring path. And you see this all the time, for example, in hospitals where a wire goes over an MRI machine and it's not shielded wire and it's not in conduit, and anytime the machine turns on, there's signal interference. So yeah, you bring up a very good point. I want to circle back. You said people aren't talking about this issue of data failure, data reliability, data accuracy. Why do you think that is? I have my opinion, but I want to hear yours.
Well, I think it's rare to have a view of the end-to-end process. Again, Google is in a very good position because we have the ability to see the end-to-end and how the handoff from one layer to the next happen. And that handoff is very hard when you're a developer for a portion of the solution and you have no control over the other portion of the solution. So I think you just focus on what your platform can do, and you just assume what comes to it will be accurate. As in, I can develop a fault detection algorithm, and I'm assuming that the model is accurate. Because you have to start with an assumption because you have potentially no control over whether it is accurate or not. Or if something changed in the building, you don't have access. Nobody's telling you that information, so you can't update your model, right? So you're relying on information transfer from layer to layer from people that are not invested in the success of your smaller portion. Am I making sense?
Yeah, complete sense. I mean, it's basically what I was thinking. So you have the OSI model for IT communications, layer 1 to layer 7. And that makes logical sense. And you've had an entire industry of tools and standard protocols developed around supporting. Let's take the example of a message from my computer to your computer. There's a standard set of, it uses Ethernet or wireless. It uses this and this and this. Right. And there are tools to support that. Yeah. I think there is such a I think it's easy once you get it to your UDMI MQTT aspect of your platform, because at that point you can start to really utilize a lot of the IT standards that are out there for monitoring, but it's everything before that and the stakeholders. So a lot are not organizationally aligned like Google is, where they maybe don't even know who to contact at the managed service provider who manages their, just picking a name out here, their Verizon internet service. So they have no idea to tell, is there a WAN link down? Is there a local network down? And there's such a disconnect there. So for someone to go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, please.
Sorry. No, I was just saying, you're right. They don't know at that point. They're just expecting the data to come through.
Yeah. And then to expect someone to go and talk about this at, a seminar or a trade show, I think that they wouldn't even begin to know where to start, because as soon as the audience says, okay, you're telling me about reliability and functional testing for that EMON-DEMON electrical meter, what happens when your gateway goes down? And they're like, well, that's by so-and-so controls. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's tough, but it needs
It's
to be talked
complex.
about,
It's
to
very
your
complex.
point.
Yeah. And it needs to be talked about because I feel it's misleading to make people it's misleading it's a make believe, right? You can do this wonderful thing with the application, but not point out you need to make sure all those things ahead of it are thought through. Anyway.
Yeah, there was please continue.
I was going to say, there's two things. It's misleading in both ways, where also if things don't work in the application, because I've experienced that too, the application is blamed ahead of the source of the problem, which the network might be down. So I think it benefit everybody to highlight those and understand that every single aspect needs to be validated, but also exposed. So there's not only one piece that is the source of the problem. There's many sources of problems, and you just 100% trust the user interface, or it relies on a lot of other aspects of your.
Yeah, that is a challenge because you read a lot of these potential misuse cases where, people can manipulate data in transit, especially since a lot of building automation systems and other building systems aren't secured in transit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
exactly.
that would be something that would be very interesting for like a healthcare organization or something where they have a managed environment that is life safety oriented. Yeah, I don't envy those people.
Yeah, but they have focused on that quite a bit, I think, ahead of other industries, because they can't, it's life and death in that case, where it's for our building, usually it should be life and death, hopefully. But I think the medical environment has strict requirement around cybersecurity.
But I'll tell you, having been doing a lot of healthcare buildings, it's interesting what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. It's a hard problem that is not solved.
I don't envy them. No. They are a prime target for like ransomware and stuff. Interesting. I know we're coming up on our time here, but I do want to hit you up with, we didn't get through all the questions, but we had a great conversation. I enjoyed it. Let me ask you two things I always ask every guest on here, which is, what is something you're excited about? It doesn't have to be with buildings, just anything. What are you excited about right now?
I like how you asked the question, because I was just reading something where we should never ask the question, what keeps you up at night? Because that's kind of the negative aspect of it. But what gets you excited? What gets you out of bed and gets you excited is, I like the positive aspect of it. I pointed out a lot of the concern. I'm very excited that as we move forward with our discovery, we know what to solve, and you're like, yeah, once I have that solved, man, I'm going to nail this thing. And then you find something else. It's like, oh, and so I feel like we're in a phase where we know what needs to be solved. We actually, specific to digital building, right? Because I have a lot of things in my private life and other things that I can be excited about. There's a lot of things that get me excited, but I'll stick to work related and digital building related. In our case, we have a very solid support team at the exec level, right? We went from ground up to, now Google wants it. Like our real estate and workplace services organization wants the solutions. We have a lot of really solid support to kind of complete this path, right? So it moved from ground up to now we have exec and we're moving forward and we're getting organized and really, really organized around it. So it's super exciting. And I think we've gone far along. We're far along into the the road or whatever, far along down the path. Far along down the path that we are quite clear on, the few elements that need to be finalized to then really push it for our entire portfolio. Like I said, we have a lot of buildings in there along the way. We've done a lot of learning along the way. And this concept of validation, is going to be our focus area for 2023. And once we nail that, I think the realm of opportunity will really open up. So I'm really excited about it. I feel like our Play Store is about to open up.
That's pretty cool. We'll have to talk about that kind of mid 2023. So I feel like there's some. I'm going to use a word that is often associated with negative things, but I don't mean it a negative. Foreboding, I will say. There's something interesting about that statement that I want to follow up on in next year, because I have, for the longest time, back when I worked for a large product manufacturer, I said, once the large technology companies figure out how to work with building data and how to consume it, that is going to be a game changer for our industry, because for the longest time, there really has not been any other alternative to this kind of MSI solution.
Right.
It's always just been expensive and really high development costs. So as it starts to fall into companies that their ethos is very open source, is very much community driven, it's going to be interesting to see how that changes and accelerates kind of these mixed technology use cases.
Yeah. I think we have a big role to play in showing the opportunity and how to transition, for sure. And and I love the opportunity to share where we are in our journey. So I appreciate you letting me kind of decide. Like, validation is my thing right now. If I go back to podcasts that I might have done a year or two ago, I'm sure the conversation was different. And I can tell how we're maturing along that journey.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to take people along, and then once we have figured it out, we can share more, and hopefully a lot of other building owner can skip some steps and get to the end a little faster. But it's a long journey, and it's a complex one for sure.
Definitely. I got one last question. I know we're running right up on the time here, so if you're good for it, it is, what question should I have asked you that I did not ask you?
I liked all the questions you asked me. And if you didn't ask me a question, there are questions I'm glad you didn't ask, because I wouldn't want to answer. Geez, Phil, I can't even come up with anything.
Well, that means we had a good interview.
Yeah. What question? Nope, can't come up top of mind. I think you have done a great job with the setup question. I'm sure in 10 minutes from now, I'll have one that pops up. Maybe I can email it to you.
Yeah, that'll be good. I've learned over my years to come at these things with an empty bowl philosophy, because if your bowl's full and you feel like you know everything, then you're going to miss out on a lot.
Right. Well, I know what question actually you did ask it in writing, but you didn't ask it during this interview. And one of so I'm cheating, right? Because I'm actually using something you had sent over, which is, what would you change if you could start over? And I don't think, I wouldn't start over, for one thing. I think I'd be looking back like, wow, I can't believe how complex it was, but I'm so happy, of where we kind of are in the present. But you're always looking back. It's like when you raise your kids and you're like, wow, that period of time they were they were toddlers. Was so hard, and you have to look back to realize how hard it was. But in the moment, you just kind of make it happen.
Yep.
But I think what's very difficult is the storytelling. So what I would have done differently is to invest in that concept of storytelling and getting people behind the transformation by telling the story in a way they understand. So what happened with this program specifically is, like I said, it was bottom up and primarily driven by cybersecurity. So it was like, we're going to put money into it because we don't want our buildings to get hacked. That was kind of for years what has kept this program going, as opposed to our real estate workplace services team understanding what opportunity we might enable. And I don't think we could not do a good job enough to explain the story in a way that was understood. And I'm like, it's like an OS. The building is the phone, and this is the OS running on the building, and this and that. I was like, they're like, yeah, I don't understand what you're talking about. Our approach is too technical. Like a lot of us in this program have a technical background, and we're excited about the technology itself and the change. Like that's what gets us going. Whereas the people we're talking to have a daily job to accomplish, and we're just disruptors. And we're disrupting it's a very, very fundamental change to how things should be done. And having the ability to tell the story well from the beginning, I think would have helped us ramp up a lot faster. So this concept of storytelling is a kind of a new concept also that's coming up. And I think if we do a good job at that, the adoption is much faster.
That's a wise statement, because if you look at a lot of the technologies that have really exploded, they have a good storyteller behind the product line.
Yeah. And we're all strong in different ways, right? But I think when you're like a tech geek and things that excite you is like data and numbers and, like that, not everyone, different people relate to different things. So it's been very difficult for us to tell the story. So we're getting there.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time today. This was fun. I learned a lot about your approach. Yeah, thank you. So I hope you all enjoyed this episode. It was definitely a long time coming. Got a couple colds over the winter and early new year, so that kind of kept me from getting this uploaded. But regardless, it's up now. And what I really hope you all took from this episode is a couple things. If you recall in episode 381 with Devin Tracy of Lockheed Martin, Devin talked about the importance of data sanitation, of data kind of cleanliness before it's ingested into and Devin's point was from analytics. Sabine's is a larger thing than just analytics. It's also about building a data framework that can be and ultimately a model that can be cascaded to buildings regardless of the building automation system. But you heard Sabine talk a lot about that. And I hope you really focused in on that, because I've been a strong advocate of data schemas, of utilizing metadata like Haystack, of data normalization. And in my experience, any of these technology solutions, digital twins, analytics, BIM, etc., they all are highly dependent on data sanitation and data normalization. So you probably heard those terms a lot. Well, I know you heard those terms a lot in this podcast. As always, everything will be available at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/413. Once again, that's podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/413. And I really encourage you, go in there, connect with Sabine via her LinkedIn, and feel free to go and kind of learn from the experts. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to facilitate expertise to the masses through this podcast. So definitely check that out. All right, folks, thanks a ton for being here, and I will see you all on the next episode. Take care.